Caitlin Clark didn't have to bring anything to the LPGA Pro. Her presence alone was already rewriting what cross-sport influence looks like. But what she got in return was even bigger than the game she's used to. As Nelly Korda surprised her with a pair of custom Nike golf shoes, the crowd saw something bigger than a gift exchange. It was a passing of power between two women who've both managed to crack the code: how to break ceilings without stepping on each other. For Caitlin, who's been the face of rising visibility in women's basketball, it was a signal that her reach and her impact has already moved beyond the court.
If you're here for the real story and not the filtered version, subscribe. And if you're sticking around for the next meltdown, you better definitely subscribe.
That moment between Nelly and Caitlin struck deeper because it wasn't just about visibility, it was about value. It proved that elite women athletes are no longer boxed into their own categories, only seen when they're dominating their sport. What Caitlin received wasn't just a pair of shoes. It was public acknowledgement from another icon that her influence is broad, lasting, and undeniable. This wasn't a handoff, it was a handshake. And it's exactly the kind of unity that's reshaping the entire landscape of women's athletics. When Nelly Korda handed Caitlin Clark a pair of her signature Nike golf shoes at the LPGA Pro, it wasn't just a thoughtful surprise. It became a defining moment. Two of the biggest names in women's sports, standing side by side, bridging the gap between golf and basketball in a way that felt effortless, genuine, and honestly overdue. It was quick, it was simple, and it landed with impact. Not because it was flashy or overproduced, but because it was real. Real admiration, real support, real recognition of what it means to be a woman at the top of her game in a world that still puts limits on what that even looks like. Let's be honest, women's sports don't usually get this kind of crossover. A top LPGA player and a college basketball phenomenon, totally different sports, totally different audiences, totally different spaces. But that's what made this hit harder, because in that moment, the divisions didn't matter. Golf shoes became a symbol, and not just of athletic gear or brand loyalty, but of mutual success. Of one athlete saying to another, "You belong here too." Nelly didn't have to say it out loud. She didn't have to post a caption or make a statement. The gesture spoke for itself. Years of work, wins, training, and visibility wrapped up into a gift, handed to someone who's been breaking boundaries in her own way on a completely different court. Caitlin Clark has redefined what it means to be a basketball star. She's filled arenas, broken records, and brought more attention to the women's game than it's had in decades. And now, she's expanding her influence just by showing up. When Caitlin appeared at the LPGA Pro, it wasn't just a cameo. It was a moment that marked her evolution from basketball icon to all-sport cultural force. That's what this was. Not just a friendly exchange, but a public acknowledgement of how powerful it is when top-tier athletes don't just stay in their lanes. They cross over and lift each other up. And let's talk about how rare that is. Women athletes have often been pushed into competing against one another, not just in their sports, but for attention, for sponsorships, for coverage. For years, it's been one seat at the table, and everyone fighting for it. But this moment? This was the opposite. This was a full-blown rejection of that scarcity mindset. Caitlin and Nelly didn't just share a moment. They shared power. Nelly said, "Here's what I've earned, and I want to give it to you." That's not just respect. That's alliance. That's strategy. That's how movements start. Not with announcements or endorsements, but with moments that are too genuine to ignore. And fans felt that instantly. The video went viral, not because it was promoted, but because it was authentic. People saw two athletes laughing, comparing shoes, vibing like longtime friends. No pretense, no ego, just support. And in a world where so many sports headlines are about scandal, rivalry, or drama, seeing something this pure hit like a breath of fresh air. What made it even more powerful is that it wasn't just a one-off feel-good story. It was a blueprint for what the future of women's sports could look like: collaborative, intersectional, and full of mutual admiration instead of competition. This wasn't about who had the better stat line or the bigger deal. It was about visibility, empowerment, and legacy building together. It also proved something people are starting to realize more and more. The influence of women athletes isn't confined to their sport. Caitlin Clark isn't just a basketball player. She's a cultural figure. She draws attention wherever she goes, whether it's courtside or on the golf course. And that attention travels. Fans follow her. They engage. They care. Which means her presence at the prom didn't just boost her own visibility. It lifted the entire event. That's what true crossover appeal looks like. And Nelly Korda? She knew exactly what she was doing. She could have kept the moment to herself. She could have made it private. But instead, she let it be seen. She let the cameras roll. She let the world witness a simple act that said, "We're in this together." It was a reminder that you don't have to be in the same sport to be on the same team. It also sent a clear message to younger athletes. Support doesn't dilute your shine. It strengthens it. Two women at the top of their game didn't just acknowledge each other. They elevated each other. And the reaction from fans proved how hungry people are to see more of that. This wasn't a marketing stunt. It wasn't a brand play disguised as a moment. It was organic. It was rooted in mutual respect. And because of that, it had more impact than any scripted campaign ever could. People don't just want highlights anymore. They want stories. They want meaning. They want to see their favorite athletes as real people who care about something bigger than just their own stats. And when those stories are based in truth, in kindness, in authenticity, they don't just go viral. They last. This moment lasted. It stood out in a sea of headlines. It reminded people that unity in sports isn't just possible, it's powerful. And when women athletes back each other publicly, the ripple effects go far beyond one tournament or one Instagram clip. It shifts the narrative. It tells sponsors that collaboration matters. It tells fans that women's sports are evolving into something more than just competition. They're a cultural force. That's what made this so important. The shoes were just the surface. Underneath was a deeper message about representation, community, and the kind of growth that can only come from genuine connection. Because when women support women, when athletes use their platforms to spotlight others, when influence isn't hoarded but shared, it changes everything. It makes space for new fans, for new voices, for a new kind of sports culture that actually reflects the world we live in. This wasn't just Nelly and Caitlin. This was for every girl who's been told to pick a lane. For every athlete who's felt like there wasn't room for more than one. For every fan who's waited to see women celebrated not for what they represent, but for what they create. That's what they did. They created something, not with speeches or campaigns, but with a simple moment of solidarity that reminded everyone watching. This is what women's sports should be. 1. If you love this moment as much as we did, go ahead and like this video. Share it with someone who needs to see what real support looks like. Drop a comment. What did this moment mean to you? And if you want more stories that spotlight the culture-shifting moments in sports, make sure to subscribe. Because what Caitlin and Nelly just showed us, that's just the beginning. It's kind of wild when you think about it. How a simple act like handing someone a pair of shoes can carry that much meaning. But when it's Nelly Korda, one of the most dominant forces in women's golf, gifting her own signature Nike kicks to Caitlin Clark, who's arguably the face of women's basketball right now, it doesn't stay simple for long. It becomes layered, symbolic, and, frankly, revolutionary. Because this wasn't just two athletes having a moment. It was two worlds colliding, two fan bases crossing paths, and two cultural icons reminding everyone that women in sports don't need to compete for the spotlight. They can share it. They can expand it. They can rewrite the entire blueprint on what athletic influence looks like in 2025. Caitlin Clark walking into the LPGA Prom wasn't just a celebrity drop-in. It was proof of her growing crossover appeal. She's moved beyond basketball and is something much bigger. She brings eyes with her. She brings conversation. She brings a whole new generation of fans into arenas, and now, onto golf courses. That's not just star power. That's cultural relevance. And what Nelly did, that was more than just kind. It was strategic, not in a calculating way, but in a this is how we build each other up kind of way. A lot of athletes talk about supporting women. Very few actually do it when the cameras are on and the moment could just as easily be about them. Nelly made space. She took what she had, her name on a Nike product, her platform at the top of the LPGA, and used it to recognize someone else. That's what leadership looks like in the new era of sports. Let's not downplay what it meant for Nelly to have that signature shoe in the first place. Women golfers haven't historically been given the same marketing treatment as their male counterparts. So for Nelly to be at the point in her career where Nike is giving her a shoe, her own branding moment, and then for her to share that with Caitlyn, especially in such a public setting, it sent a loud, clear message. We're not competing. We're collaborating. And that word, collaboration, is where everything shifts, because it flips the script on what sports culture has traditionally been about. For decades, the narrative's been dominated by rivalries. One athlete against another. One league trying to outshine the rest. One brand fighting for territory. But now the most powerful athletes aren't interested in that. They're choosing connection over competition. They're choosing celebration over ego. That's what this moment at the LPGA Prom symbolized. And people felt it. The video went viral for a reason. It didn't look like PR. It looked like two women who respected each other. It looked like one of the best golfers in the world saying, "Hey, I see you." It looked like mutual admiration. And in a landscape where authenticity is often packaged and monetized, this was different. This was real. The moment hit timelines, sports blogs, and group chats because it was refreshing. No one was trying to dominate the narrative. No one was playing the main character. Instead, we saw balance, equal energy. Two sports titans just being themselves and reminding everyone watching what women's sports are really about. Work ethic, resilience, leadership, and yes, genuine friendship. And what's especially significant is that this wasn't about a game, a match, or a championship. This wasn't about who had the better stats or who broke the latest record. It was about being there, showing up, supporting each other's moment. Caitlin Clark didn't need to be at the LPGA event. She had nothing to prove, but her presence elevated everything. She brought a new wave of attention to women's golf, a sport that often gets sidelined when it comes to mainstream media. And Nelly? She leaned into that. Instead of seeing Caitlin as an outsider, she welcomed her into the space like she belonged there, because she does. That's what breaking barriers looks like. That interaction also pushed the conversation around women's sports forward in a way that felt organic and long overdue. For so long, women athletes have been measured by how well they fit into a pre-existing system. This moment was a reminder that they can create new systems, new traditions, new ways of interacting that don't depend on who gets the most coverage, but on who creates the most connection. And connection is the word here, because that's what people really responded to. Not just the event itself, but the energy behind it. The laughter, the smiles, the realness, the way it felt unscripted. You don't get those moments often. And when you do, they stick. There's also something powerful about the way this interaction subtly challenged the old norms around gender in sports. In the past, male athletes have always had the luxury of camaraderie across sports. You see it all the time. NFL players at NBA games, MLB stars showing up at the Masters. It's celebrated. It's covered. But for women, those moments have been rarer. Less public. Less amplified. But that's changing. Caitlin Clark and Nelly Korda made it clear. Women can and should show up for each other across sports. Not as side notes. Not as guests. But as equals. As collaborators. As allies with shared goals and overlapping fan bases. It also says a lot about how smart these two athletes are when it comes to using their platforms. They know their value. They know their reach. And they're using both not just for themselves, but to build something collective, something inclusive, something sustainable. Because the truth is, women's sports don't grow in isolation. They grow through community, through shared moments that remind fans and sponsors and media outlets and sports executives that the ceiling isn't real, that the narrative isn't fixed, that the audience is already here, ready, watching, and waiting for more moments like this. This moment, though brief, cracked something wide open. It gave fans a reason to believe in what's next, in the future of women's sports, not just as an industry, but as a culture, one that values authenticity, one that celebrates shared success, one that thrives not because of competition, but because of connection. And it starts with athletes like Caitlin Clark and Nelly Korda, who aren't waiting around for legacy systems to validate them. They're creating their own legacy, right now, in real time. With every moment they share, every boundary they break, and every fan they inspire to believe that all sports, belong to everyone. There's something about this moment. Nelly Korda handing Caitlin Clark those Nike golf shoes that just won't let go. It stays with you. It replays in your head not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was true. No forced smiles, no overly staged handoff, no one doing too much. Just two women at the top of their respective games, effortlessly shifting the tone of the conversation around women's sports with one simple, spontaneous act. And let's not pretend this wasn't significant, because it was. Not in a manufactured, headline-chasing kind of way, but in the kind of way that makes people stop scrolling. You see Caitlin Clark, this generational basketball star who's already shattered attendance records and ignited a wave of renewed interest in the women's game, smiling next to Nelly Korda, a quiet yet commanding force in women's golf. They're laughing, they're talking, and then Nelly gives her the shoes. And suddenly the moment becomes bigger than either of them. Because what they did, consciously or not, was reject the old model that kept women's sports compartmentalized. For years, athletes were expected to stick to their lanes, stay in their bubble, build their brand, and maybe if they were lucky, get noticed outside their sport. But Nelly and Caitlin didn't just step outside those lines. They connected them. They blurred them. They made the moment not about basketball, not about golf, but about women's sports as a whole. And that's powerful. Because when you look at how male athletes have always supported each other across sports, how a quarterback can hang courtside at an NBA game and instantly become part of the conversation, it's clear that women athletes have had to fight harder to build those same cultural bridges. They've had to prove their value over and over, not just to fans, but to brands, to networks, to entire sports ecosystems. But here, no proof was needed, just presence. Caitlin didn't walk into that LPGA event trying to prove she belonged. She already belonged, and Nelly knew that. The gesture wasn't a welcome into golf. It was an acknowledgement of equality, of peer status, of mutual greatness. And while that may sound dramatic to some, ask yourself, when was the last time you saw two top-tier women athletes from completely different sports go viral not because of what they said or did in competition, but because of how they supported one another? It doesn't happen enough. And that's what made this feel like such a shift, a cultural correction in real time. This wasn't just an act of generosity. It was a subtle challenge to the system. It said, we don't need to wait for coverage to find us. We'll create the moment ourselves. And they did. What's equally important is how the public responded. The video wasn't treated like a one-day feel-good blip. It was shared, dissected, celebrated. It resonated across demographics. Golf fans, basketball fans, casual sports viewers, people who normally don't pay attention to these events. Why? Because it was emotionally intelligent. Because it didn't try to sell anything. And in doing so, it sold everything: loyalty, leadership, empowerment, and mutual respect. That kind of authentic connection between athletes doesn't just build a fan base, it builds a movement. And the fact that it came from two women who have earned everything they have, who've trained, performed, competed, and built their names from the ground up, only made it more poignant. Neither of them was handed their platform. They took it, and now that they have it, they're using it to create space for others. They're the reason this wasn't just seen as a cute interaction. It was a moment of transfer, of power, of recognition, of visibility. Caitlin Clark's influence in basketball is undeniable. She's changed what women's college hoops looks like. She's changed the energy in arenas. She's changed how the media talks about the women's game. And now she's doing the same beyond the court, just by showing up. That's the kind of influence that money can't buy. And that's why Nelly's gesture landed with so much impact. Because it wasn't just about gifting a product. It was about giving credit. It was saying, what you're doing matters, not just in your sport, but in mine too. And that hits on a much deeper level than any co-branded partnership or marketing rollout. This was organic. It was cultural. And that's why fans felt it. In a time when every moment seems like it has to be maximized for content, this one just was. It happened. It went viral. It meant something. No hashtags. No catchphrases. Just two athletes standing in their power and choosing to lift each other higher. That's the kind of thing that doesn't just change perception, it changes trajectory. And honestly, this should be the standard. Women's sports shouldn't have to rely on competition for relevance. Rivalries are fun, sure, but collaboration? That's where the real growth happens. That's where the audience multiplies. That's where cultures connect. This isn't about Caitlyn being a guest in golf or Nelly being a mentor. It's about the idea that women athletes, regardless of sport, are part of a larger ecosystem. And when one wins, everyone wins. This moment also gave fans something they rarely get from the sports world. Representation that feels joyful. Too often, the coverage around women in sports focuses on struggle, pay gaps, lack of coverage, underdog narratives. And while all of that is real, it's not the only story. Sometimes the story is just women succeeding, supporting, and thriving together. And that story, it's finally being told. So if you watched that moment between Nelly and Caitlyn and felt like something had shifted, something real, you weren't wrong. That was more than just a gift exchange. That was a cultural statement, a new chapter. And the best part? It didn't need to be announced. It didn't need to be explained. It just happened, and everyone got it. If that hit you too, hit like. Share this video with someone who still doesn't get why women's sports are having their moment. Comment with your thoughts. What did this moment mean to you? And subscribe, because if this is what the future of sports looks like, we're so here for it.